They spent almost $300,000 trying to build across my ranch. The entire project came apart because of 4 faded Orange County Survey monuments everyone decided to ignore. If you had driven past the Whitmore Ranch that morning, you probably would have believed the construction crew knew exactly what they were doing. So did they. The engineers had stamped plans. The contractors had permits. The Homeowners Association had approvals signed months earlier. Every person on that job site believed the paperwork in their hands carried more authority than the ground beneath their boots. They were wrong. My name is Caleb Whitmore, and my family has owned this ranch in Central Texas for nearly 90 years. My grandfather bought the property after returning home from the Second World War with little more than determination, an aging pickup truck, and one promise to himself. No one would ever force his family off their land again. My father spent the rest of his life adding pasture after pasture, teaching me that land was never really something you owned. You simply protected it until the next generation was ready to do the same. My late wife, Margaret, loved the western pasture more than anywhere else on the ranch. Every spring she planted bluebonnets there because she believed every family deserved one place that stayed the same, even when everything else changed. She passed away several years ago, but every April those flowers still return exactly where she planted them. That was the pasture the Homeowners Association decided to cross. The morning itself began like hundreds before it. I had just finished repairing a water trough near the south pasture and was driving back toward the house shortly after sunrise. As I reached the top of a low hill overlooking the ranch, something immediately caught my attention. 3 white contractor trucks, an excavator on a trailer, utility equipment stacked beside the fence line. My first thought was simple. Somebody had taken a wrong turn. Then I looked again. They were not parked beside my ranch. They were already inside it. I slowed my truck, but stayed behind the windshield for another minute. My father always told me that people reveal far more before they know someone is watching than after they realize they have an audience. So I watched. The foreman spread engineering drawings across the hood of a pickup truck. An engineer pointed confidently toward the western ridge. Workers unloaded conduit, measuring wheels, and bright orange marking paint. They laughed, joked, and moved with the relaxed confidence of people who believed every important question had already been answered weeks earlier. Then I noticed the first Orange County monument standing only a few feet from the excavator. About 30 yards farther down the pasture stood another, then a fourth. 4 permanent county survey monuments stretched across the western boundary exactly where they had stood for more than 30 years. My father walked that line with me every spring after branding season. He never called them survey monuments. He called them promises. A fence tells your neighbor what you believe, he always said. These monuments tell a courtroom what has already been proven. I never forgot those words because he repeated them every single year until I could find every monument without his help. One contractor stepped directly over the nearest monument while carrying a bundle of utility pipe. Another hammered a temporary wooden stake into the ground only a few feet away. The excavator rolled forward until one steel track stopped inches from the Orange County marker. Nobody pointed at it. Nobody questioned it. Nobody even looked down. Missing one county monument could happen to anyone. Ignoring all 4 required a decision. That was the moment I realized this was never going to be an ordinary property disagreement. I quietly stepped out of my truck and closed the door. A young contractor noticed me and smiled. "Morning, sir," he called. "We should have everything wrapped up before lunch." He sounded genuinely friendly. He believed he was exactly where he was supposed to be. That told me something important. He was not the person who had made the real mistake. I walked past him and stopped beside the nearest county monument. The faded orange paint was chipped from decades of Texas. Heat, winter freezes, grazing cattle, and spring floods, but it had never moved. Margaret used to tease me because I checked those old monuments more often than I checked the mailbox. One afternoon, she asked why they mattered so much. I told her they were the only things on this ranch that had never once lied to my family. She smiled, brushed the dust off one with her hand, and planted another handful of bluebonnet seeds beside it. "Then I hope they outlive both of us," she said. Behind me, another vehicle rolled slowly onto the ranch road. A black luxury sport utility vehicle came to a stop beside the contractor trucks. Vanessa Holloway stepped out carrying a leather portfolio beneath one arm. smiling with the quiet confidence of someone who believed every answer she would ever need was already inside that folder. She glanced briefly at the Orange County monument beside my boots before looking away without a second thought. Then she looked directly at the foreman and said, "Everything looks good. You can stay on schedule." At that moment, before either of us had exchanged a single word, I knew something she did not. She believed the most important document on that ranch was the one she carried under her arm. I knew the most important evidence had been standing in that pasture for more than 30 years, patiently waiting for someone willing to read the first page of the story instead of the last. Vanessa did not walk toward me first. She walked straight to the foreman. "Everything still on schedule?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "We are ready to begin trenching." She gave a satisfied nod before finally turning toward me. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." Her smile was polished, confident, and completely free of uncertainty. "I hope this project causes as little inconvenience as possible." I rested one hand on the nearest Orange County monument. "That depends." She tilted her head slightly. "On what?" "On whether you know where your project actually begins." She smiled politely, almost amused by the question. "I assure you we do." Without another word, she opened the leather portfolio tucked beneath her arm and removed a neatly organized packet of documents, engineering drawings, utility permits, environmental approvals, construction schedules, county filing receipts. Every page looked official. Every signature appeared legitimate. It was exactly the kind of paperwork designed to convince everyone that every important question had already been answered. She handed the packet to me with complete confidence. "The Homeowners Association spent months preparing this utility project," she said. "Licensed engineers designed it. Attorneys reviewed it. Every required approval has already been obtained." Behind her, the foreman raised his hand toward the excavator operator. The diesel engine rumbled louder as the machine slowly eased into position. One contractor stretched a measuring tape across the pasture, while another sprayed bright orange construction paint directly beside one of the permanent county monuments without giving it a second glance. A third worker drove a temporary wooden stake into the ground only a few feet away from the county marker, treating the fresh stake as though it mattered more than the monument that had legally defined the boundary for decades. I accepted the paperwork but continued watching the crew for another few seconds. They were doing exactly what experienced professionals should do. They trusted the plans they had been given. The problem was never going to be the people holding the shovels. The problem was the person who decided which documents belonged in the project file. I finally lowered my eyes to the packet and slowly turned the pages. My father always believed the most expensive mistakes began with one dangerous assumption. Someone else already checked. That was why he read every contract himself, even after attorneys reviewed it. "Trust people," he used to say. "Verify paperwork." I skipped past the engineering drawings and construction schedules. Those pages explained how the project would be built. They did not explain why anyone believed it belonged on my ranch. Near the back of the packet, I found the legal references, parcel descriptions, utility corridor filings, environmental reviews, easement citations, survey references. Everything appeared complete. Almost. I read the last few pages again. Then I quietly started over from the beginning. The feeling arrived immediately. Not because I found something incorrect, because I could not find something that absolutely should have been there. I closed the packet and handed it back to Vanessa exactly as she had given it to me. She accepted it with the same confident smile. "Everything looks in order?" she asked. "May I ask you one question?" I replied, "Of course." "Before approving this project, did anyone verify the original county boundary survey?" Her answer came without the slightest hesitation. "Our engineers completed all required survey work months ago." I smiled politely. That was not my question. For the first time that morning, the confidence in her expression shifted ever so slightly. "I am confident they reviewed every document that mattered." I looked down at the Orange County monument beside my boots before meeting her eyes again. "Interesting." "Why?" she asked. "Because somebody built this entire project from the second chapter of the story." I paused just long enough for the silence to become uncomfortable, and nobody bothered to read the first one. Before she could respond, the foreman looked toward her. "Ma'am." She turned without taking her eyes completely off me. "Yes. The crew is ready." Vanessa looked back at me, gave a small, dismissive smile, and waved one hand toward the excavator. Those old county markers are irrelevant. We have approved plans. She turned toward the foreman. Go ahead. Start digging. The foreman hesitated for barely a heartbeat. His eyes briefly drifted toward the faded orange monument, standing only a few feet away before he picked up his radio. Begin excavation, he said. The excavator eased forward. Its bucket dropped into the Texas soil. In less than 10 seconds, a project that had taken months to approve had begun creating evidence that would eventually bring the entire operation to a complete stop. The excavator's bucket cut into the Texas soil, lifting the first strip of earth as though the decision had already become permanent. The foreman watched with quiet satisfaction while another contractor rolled a measuring wheel alongside the trench. Bright orange construction paint stretched across the western pasture, crossing within a few feet of the permanent county monuments, as if those faded markers no longer existed. I remained exactly where I was. There was no point raising my voice. My father used to tell me that the louder people argue, the less attention they pay to the evidence. If I wanted this situation resolved correctly, the records would have to do the talking. I opened the packet Vanessa had handed me one more time. This time I ignored every engineering drawing, permit, and construction schedule. Those documents explained how to build a utility corridor. They did not explain whether anyone had the legal authority to build it here. I turned directly to the survey references. Utility Layout Survey, Environmental Survey, Topographic Survey, Subdivision Survey. Every document pointed neatly to another recent filing. It looked complete until I reached the place where the chain should have begun. I flipped backward, then forward again. The original county boundary survey simply was not there. It had not been replaced. It had not been amended. It had been skipped entirely. My grandfather's voice drifted back into my memory. Never trust the last measurement until you know where the first one started. As a boy, I thought he was talking about stretching fence wire across a pasture. Years later, I realized he was talking about life. One mistake at the beginning has a way of making every careful step afterward look correct until someone checks the starting point. Behind me, the excavator continued working while another contractor carefully measured the depth of the trench. They were doing quality work. They were simply doing it from the wrong legal beginning. Vanessa noticed I was still reading instead of arguing. She walked over with the same calm confidence she had carried since arriving. Still looking for a reason to stop us? She asked. Actually, I replied, closing the packet. I think I just found the reason. She smiled. Then I suppose this conversation is over. I looked toward the line of faded county monuments stretching across the pasture. No, I think it is. Finally about to begin. She folded her arms. You really believe those old survey markers matter more than approved engineering plans? Not the markers, I answered. The county record behind them. She gave a quiet laugh. Our engineers know exactly what they are doing. I believe they do, I said. I just do not believe they were given the first document they should have read. She looked toward the lead engineer. Everything's still on track. He looked up from his instruments and gave her a confident thumbs up. Everything checks out. Vanessa looked back at me with renewed confidence. You see? Maybe, I answered. Or maybe everything checks out because everyone started from the same missing page. That sentence seemed to linger a little longer than she expected. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she glanced toward the engineering packet still resting in my hands, almost as if she were wondering whether I had noticed something she had not. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my phone. There was only one person I trusted to answer the question now forming in my mind. Claire Donovan picked up before the second ring finished. Morning, Caleb. Claire, I need the original county boundary survey for the Whitmore Ranch. Not the subdivision survey. Not the engineering layout. I need the survey every other document should have started from. The line became quiet for several seconds. Finally, she asked, It is missing, isn't it? I watched another temporary construction stake being driven into the ground only a few feet from a permanent county monument that had quietly defined the property line for more than 30 years. Every recent survey is here, I said. The only one missing is the one every other survey depends on. Claire took a slow breath. When she spoke again, the confidence in her voice had been replaced by genuine concern. Do not stop the crew yet. Why? I asked. Because if they overlooked the original county boundary survey, she said quietly, I have a feeling they overlooked something much bigger. Give me 10 minutes. I am going straight into the county archive. Claire called back before the excavator had completed its first full Pass across the western pasture. I could hear heavy file drawers sliding shut somewhere inside the county records office before she even spoke. You were right, she said. The original county boundary survey is still the controlling survey for your entire western property line. I leaned against the cedar fence overlooking the construction site, while another bucket of soil rolled neatly onto the growing pile beside the trench. Walk me through it. Papers shuffled quietly on her desk. The survey was recorded in 1994. 8 years later, the county completed an official monument verification. Every permanent monument was inspected, photographed, assigned an identification number, and reaffirmed as the controlling legal reference. There has never been an amended survey, never a replacement survey, and never a court order changing that boundary. My eyes drifted toward the 4 faded orange county monuments standing across the pasture. They had survived floods, droughts, wildfires, grazing cattle, and decades of Texas summers without moving an inch. Yet nearly a dozen experienced professionals had walked past them that morning without giving them a second look. There is something else, Claire continued. The engineering survey the Homeowners Association relied on contains a limitation statement. What does it say? I asked. It specifically states that the drawing is intended for construction layout only. It is not a legal boundary determination. Whoever prepared it assumed the original county boundary survey had already been verified before construction ever began. I looked toward the engineers discussing measurements beside the trench. Suddenly, the entire situation became painfully clear. Their engineering work might have been flawless. Their starting point was not. My father spent years trying to teach me exactly that lesson. Every spring, he insisted we walk the western boundary before checking fences or cattle. One year I complained that those old county monuments never seemed to change. He smiled, rested one hand on the nearest orange marker, and said, "That is exactly why the law trusts them. They never move just because somebody wishes. They would." Standing there that morning, I finally understood he had never been talking only about surveying. He had been talking about truth. Opinions change. Confidence changes. Records do not. Margaret understood those monuments better than she ever admitted. Every April, she planted bluebonnets beside the western pasture because she loved the contrast between bright flowers and faded orange paint. One afternoon, she asked why I cared so much about those old markers. I told her they were the only things on the ranch that had never once changed their story. She smiled, brushed the dust from one with her hand, and quietly said, "Then maybe they have been protecting this family longer than any fence ever could." As I looked across the pasture, I realized she had been right. The contractors stepped over them. The engineers measured around them. Vanessa dismissed them with a wave of her hand. Yet those 4 little monuments had quietly outlasted every assumption made that morning without saying a single word. My phone vibrated before I could slip it back into my pocket. Claire had just sent a scanned county filing attached to the original survey. Beneath it, she typed one short message. "Robert Ellis is reviewing this document now, and I think we just found the real reason this project is about to stop." I opened the attachment and immediately recognized the title printed across the top of the page. Monument Preservation Certificate. Before I could read the first paragraph, I heard raised voices behind me. The lead engineer had stopped the foreman beside the trench and was pointing back toward the 4 orange county monuments. "Hold on," he said loudly enough for several contractors to hear. "Something does not line up." For the first time that morning, nobody moved. The excavator continued idling, but its bucket remained suspended above the trench. Even Vanessa turned toward the engineer, the confidence in her expression interrupted for the very first time. I looked back at the title on my phone, then toward the silent construction crew. We had started the morning searching for one missing survey. Now it looked like that missing survey had just led us to something far more difficult for anyone to ignore. The engineer kept staring at the county monuments for several long seconds before looking back at the trench. "Hold on," he repeated, this time with far less confidence than before. The foreman walked over immediately. "What is it?" Instead of answering, the engineer took the rolled construction drawings from under his arm, spread them across the hood of a pickup truck again, and began tracing survey references with his finger. One page, then another, then back again. His movements became slower each time. Around us, the contractors quietly stopped what they were doing. Nobody had ordered them to stop. They simply recognized the expression on the engineer's face. It was the look every experienced professional gets when something they were completely certain about suddenly stops making sense. Vanessa stepped closer. Is there a problem? I am checking something. The engineer replied without looking up. Checking what? She asked. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the 4 Orange County monuments stretching across the pasture, then back at the engineering plans. Finally, he spoke. These plans begin with the subdivision survey. Vanessa folded her arms. Of course they do. But they never reference the original county boundary survey. The confidence in her voice never changed. Because the engineering survey supersedes it. Before anyone else could respond, Robert Ellis calmly shook his head. No, it does not. The entire work site became noticeably quieter. Robert opened his weathered aluminum survey case and carefully placed the Certified Monument Preservation Certificate beside the original county boundary survey. The faded county seal immediately caught the engineer's attention. Robert rested one hand on the document. This certificate was recorded after the original boundary survey. It permanently established those 4 monuments as the controlling legal reference for every future survey affecting this boundary. The engineer leaned closer. He compared the identification numbers listed on the certificate with the numbers stamped into the Orange County monuments standing across the pasture. Every number matched. He slowly exhaled. I have never seen this document. That, Robert replied, is exactly the problem. Vanessa looked from Robert to the engineer. Even if that certificate exists, our project still has approved plans. Robert nodded politely. Approved plans explain how to build something. He gently tapped the faded county record. This explains where your measurements were legally required to begin. The engineer quietly returned to the construction drawings. This time he traced every coordinate from the very beginning instead of the middle. The farther he followed the references, the more serious his expression became. Finally he stopped, looked directly at the foreman, and said something that instantly changed the mood across the entire ranch. I cannot verify this alignment anymore. The foreman blinked. What do you mean? The engineer looked back toward the trench. If the county monuments are the controlling reference, then I cannot certify that this corridor is located where these plans say it is. Complete silence settled over the work site. One contractor quietly lowered the measuring wheel he had been holding. Another pulled off his work gloves. Even the excavator operator leaned out of the cab, waiting for instructions that never came. Vanessa stepped forward again. We are not stopping an approved project because of one old county record. The engineer slowly looked at her. This is not one old county record. He pointed toward the original survey, then the monument preservation certificate, and finally the 4 faded orange monuments stretching across the pasture. They all say exactly the same thing. For the first time that morning, Vanessa did not have an immediate reply. The foreman broke the silence instead. Are you telling me we may be digging on land we cannot legally verify? The engineer looked down at the plans in front of him before answering quietly. Until someone proves otherwise, yes. Nobody moved. The excavator remained idling beside the trench, but no one reached for the controls. My phone vibrated once more. Another message from Claire appeared on the screen. There was no attachment this time. Only one sentence. Caleb, the original Whitmore Ranch deed has been located, and I think it just answered the question everyone has been asking all morning. My phone vibrated again just as the silence settled over the construction site. I stepped a few yards away from the others before opening Claire's message. There was no attachment this time. Only one sentence. The original Whitmore Ranch deed has been located. Call me now. I pressed her number immediately. She answered before the first ring had fully ended. Tell me you are standing somewhere quiet, she said. I looked back toward the trench where the excavator still sat motionless. Quiet enough. Good, she replied. Because what I found changes everything. I opened the scanned deed she had just sent. The document was nearly 90 years old, its pages faded with age, but every county recording stamp remained perfectly clear. Claire had highlighted one paragraph near the bottom of the first page. Read it carefully, she said. I slowly read the words aloud. The grantor permanently reserves exclusive ownership, access, utility, maintenance, and approval rights across the Western Corridor unless expressly conveyed by a separately recorded instrument. I stopped reading. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, Claire broke the silence. Do you understand what that means? My grandfather never transferred those rights. Exactly. Her voice remained calm, but I could hear the excitement beneath it. The survey established where the boundary is. The Monument Preservation Certificate confirmed which monuments legally control that boundary. This deed answers a completely different question. It confirms that the corridor itself was never transferred to anyone else. I slowly lowered the phone and looked across the pasture. The survey had never been the final answer. It had simply led us to the document that mattered even more. Robert noticed my expression before I said a word. What did Claire find? I handed him the phone. He adjusted his glasses and carefully read the highlighted paragraph. A slow smile appeared across his face. There it is, he said quietly. The missing piece. Vanessa stepped closer, trying to see the screen. Would someone explain what everyone keeps looking at? Robert handed the phone back to me before answering. The original Whitmore Ranch deed. She frowned. And your project crosses a corridor that was never conveyed out of the Whitmore family. She folded her arms. That cannot be correct. We have approved engineering plans. Robert nodded politely. Engineering plans explain how to build a project. He paused for a moment. They do not create property rights that were never transferred. Vanessa looked toward the lead engineer. Is that true? The engineer held out his hand. May I see the deed? I passed him my phone. He carefully compared the highlighted reservation clause with the legal description printed on the engineering drawings. His eyes moved back and forth between the two documents several times. The longer he looked, the quieter he became. Finally, he lowered the phone. This reservation is not referenced anywhere in our legal package. Robert folded his survey case closed. Because whoever assembled your file assumed the subdivision records told the complete history of the property. The engineer slowly shook his head. If this reservation was never released. He stopped before finishing the sentence. Robert completed it for him. Then this corridor was never legally available for construction. The foreman stepped closer, looking first at the engineer and then toward Vanessa. Should we shut the project down? Before the engineer could answer, Vanessa spoke firmly. No, we have permits. We have approvals. We are not stopping because someone found an old deed. The engineer did not respond. Instead, he looked back at the highlighted paragraph one more time before quietly handing my phone back to me. The silence lasted several long seconds. Finally, he looked at Vanessa and spoke with none of the confidence he had shown that morning. I cannot certify this alignment anymore. Nobody said a word. Even the contractors standing nearby seemed to understand the importance of what they had just heard. The foreman slowly turned toward the excavator operator, but before he could speak, my phone vibrated one final time. Another message from Claire appeared on the screen. County Land Management has completed its preliminary review. Michael Grant is already driving to the ranch with authority to conduct an official field verification. Nearly 20 minutes passed before another White County pickup appeared at the entrance to the ranch. Nobody had ordered the contractors to stop, yet nobody had resumed digging either. The excavator continued idling beside the trench, but the operator sat with both hands resting on his knees instead of the controls. The lead engineer stood beside the hood of the pickup, reading the original Whitmore Ranch deed for what had to be the fifth time. The foreman paced quietly between the trench and the county monuments without saying a word. The entire job site felt suspended between confidence and doubt, waiting for someone with authority to settle the question. The pickup rolled to a stop beside Robert's truck, and a tall man wearing a tan field jacket stepped out carrying a black document case and a clipboard. Michael Grant from County Land Management had spent more than 2 decades resolving boundary disputes throughout the county. He was known for one thing above all else. He never started with opinions. He started with records. He shook hands with Robert first, then Claire, then me. Only after greeting everyone did he look across the western pasture and ask the question that immediately changed the atmosphere. Where are the controlling monuments? Not where the trench was. Not where the contractors were working. The monuments. Robert pointed toward the 4 faded orange county markers stretching across the pasture. Michael walked directly to the first one, knelt beside it, brushed away the dirt covering the identification plate, and compared the stamped number against the Monument Preservation Certificate. He wrote something on his clipboard before moving to the second monument, then the third, then the fourth. Every identification number matched the county record exactly. Nothing had moved. Nothing had been replaced. Nothing had been disturbed. Only after verifying every monument did Michael walk the full length of the trench. Every few yards, He stopped, looked back toward the permanent county monuments, then compared them with the temporary wooden stakes the contractors had installed that morning. The farther he walked, the more obvious the difference became. When he returned, he quietly spread the engineering plans beside the original county boundary survey, the monument preservation certificate, and the original Whitmore Ranch deed. He studied all 4 documents without speaking. Finally, he looked directly at the lead engineer. "Did your team establish this alignment from the engineering package you received?" "Yes, sir," the engineer answered honestly. "Were you provided with the original county boundary survey?" "No, sir." "The monument preservation certificate?" "No, sir." "The original deed containing the reservation clause?" The engineer slowly shook his head. "No, sir." Michael nodded once before writing another note on his clipboard. "Then your team established this project using incomplete legal records." A heavy silence settled over the work site. One contractor quietly lowered the measuring wheel he had been carrying. Another removed his gloves and looked toward the trench. The foreman slowly took off his hard hat. Finally he spoke. "If we had these records before today, we would never have started this project." "I believe you," Michael replied. The lead engineer looked toward Vanessa before speaking, his voice noticeably quieter than it had been all morning. "These documents should have been part of our legal review before we approved this alignment." Vanessa immediately stepped forward. The Homeowners Association relied on licensed professionals, valid permits, and approved plans. Michael acknowledged her with a polite nod. "I do not doubt that." She seemed relieved for only a moment. Then he calmly continued. "Permits authorize construction. They do not establish property rights. The public record establishes property rights." Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say anything, the foreman interrupted her for the first time that day. "Ma'am." She turned toward him. "Yes." He glanced at the trench, then at the county records spread across the truck. "I am not asking my crew to dig another foot until this is resolved." Vanessa looked stunned. "We are under contract." The foreman met her eyes respectfully, but did not back away. "I am under license." The words hung over the ranch in complete silence. Even the lead engineer slowly nodded in agreement. Michael finished writing on the final page of his field verification, signed it, slipped it into the county binder, and closed the cover. "My field inspection is complete," he said. "Everything documented today will become part of the permanent county record." He looked toward the entrance of the ranch. The next decision no longer belongs to county land management. Almost on cue, 2 sheriff's office patrol vehicles appeared at the end of the gravel road and began making their way toward the construction site. This time, nobody moved. Nobody reached for another shovel. Nobody climbed back into the excavator. Even Vanessa remained silent as every person on the ranch watched the patrol vehicles approach, because for the first time that morning, everyone understood the same thing. The paperwork had started the project. The public record was about to decide whether it ended. Sheriff Daniel Brooks stepped out of the lead patrol vehicle carrying a slim county binder instead of a citation book. The 2 deputies who arrived with him remained beside their cruisers, quietly watching the construction site without saying a word. By then the atmosphere had changed completely. The excavator was still idling, but the operator had climbed down and was standing beside the machine with his hard hat tucked beneath one arm. The contractors were no longer measuring. They were waiting. The lead engineer stood beside my truck holding the original deed in one hand and the rolled construction plans in the other, as though he already knew which one carried more weight. Sheriff Brooks greeted Michael Grant first, then Robert Ellis, then Claire. Only after speaking with the county officials did he turn toward Vanessa. "Good afternoon," he said evenly. "I understand there is a disagreement concerning this construction project." Vanessa answered immediately. "Sheriff, there really is not. The Homeowners Association obtained every permit required for this work. Licensed engineers approved the plans. We are operating under valid authorization." Sheriff Brooks nodded politely. "I understand." She relaxed slightly. Then he calmly added, "The question today is not whether construction was approved. The question is whether the public record supports where that construction is taking place." The confidence in her expression faded again. Michael handed the sheriff the completed field verification together with certified copies of the original county boundary survey, the monument preservation certificate, and the original Whitmore Ranch deed. Sheriff Brooks opened the binder without saying another word. He read every page carefully, occasionally comparing one document with another before continuing. Nobody interrupted him. Even the wind across the pasture seemed louder than the idle diesel engine. After several minutes, he closed the binder and looked toward Robert. "You verified every controlling monument?" Robert nodded. "Every identification number matches the county record exactly." The sheriff turned toward Michael. "Any indication those monuments have been moved or disturbed?" "None." "And the construction alignment?" Michael pointed toward the trench. "It was established from a secondary engineering reference rather than the controlling county boundary." Sheriff Brooks then looked toward Claire. "You confirm the reservation clause?" Claire handed him the certified deed. "I also confirm there is no recorded release, amendment, easement, or transfer removing those reserved rights." The sheriff slowly closed the binder and walked toward the nearest Orange County monument. He stood beside it for several quiet moments, looking first at the faded marker, then at the trench, then back toward the construction crew. Finally, he turned around. "Whose excavator is that?" The foreman raised his hand. "Mine, Sheriff." "Can you move it?" "Yes, sir." The foreman started toward the machine before Vanessa stepped forward. "Sheriff, with respect, this project has already been approved." He looked at her calmly. "I understand." She continued, "Stopping work now will create significant delays and expenses." The sheriff held her gaze for a brief moment before answering. "Continuing work on property that the county record does not support creates a much larger problem." He turned back toward the foreman. "Move the excavator completely off Mr. Whitmore's property." Nobody argued. The foreman climbed into the cab, started the engine, carefully backed away from the trench, crossed beyond the line of county monuments, and parked the machine outside the disputed corridor before shutting it down. The silence afterward was overwhelming. Then the lead engineer took one slow step forward. He looked directly at Vanessa. "We should have stopped the moment Mr. Whitmore asked about the original county boundary survey." She stared at him. "We had approved plans." He slowly shook his head. "We had approved plans." He lifted the original deed slightly. "He had the property rights." The foreman nodded in agreement. "If these county records had been included in our project file, my crew never would have unloaded a single piece of equipment." One contractor quietly added, "Neither would the rest of us." Those simple words carried farther than anyone expected. They came from the people who had actually been doing the work, not from attorneys or officials. Vanessa looked around the work site, searching for someone willing to defend the project. Nobody did. The authority she believed she carried inside her leather portfolio had quietly disappeared, replaced by county records that had been sitting in public archives for decades. Sheriff Brooks handed the binder back to Michael before addressing the foreman one final time. "Based on today's verified county record, no additional work will take place inside this corridor." "Understood, Sheriff," the foreman replied without hesitation. He picked up his radio, pressed the transmit button, and spoke 4 words that echoed across the western pasture. "Pack everything. We are leaving." Within seconds, the construction site came alive again, but this time in reverse. Measuring tapes disappeared into toolboxes. Utility pipe was loaded back onto trailers. Temporary wooden stakes were pulled from the ground. One by one, when the last trailer pulled away from the trench, the only markers still standing across the western pasture were the same 4 faded Orange County monuments that had been quietly telling the truth since long before anyone arrived that morning. The foreman's voice carried across the western pasture as crews began loading the last sections of conduit back onto their trailers. Temporary wooden stakes disappeared almost as quickly as they had been driven into the ground that morning. Measuring wheels were folded. Survey flags were gathered. Toolboxes slammed shut one after another. It was remarkable how quickly a project built on confidence could come apart once it collided with the public record. Sheriff Brooks stood quietly for a moment, watching the activity before turning toward Vanessa. "Based on today's verified county record," he said evenly, "this construction activity will not continue inside this corridor unless the underlying property rights are lawfully established." Vanessa looked down at the leather portfolio she had carried onto my ranch with so much confidence only a few hours earlier. She slowly closed it without saying a word. The portfolio had not changed. The permits inside had not changed. The engineering plans had not changed. The only thing that had changed was everyone's understanding of what those documents could actually prove. The lead engineer stepped forward first. "Sheriff," he said, I would like today's field verification included in our permanent project file. Michael Grant nodded. It already will be. Every document from today's inspection becomes part of the county record before the courthouse closes this afternoon. The engineer turned toward me and extended his hand. Mr. Whitmore, I owe you an apology. We trusted the newest documents without confirming the oldest ones. That mistake belongs to us. I shook his hand. You corrected it the moment the evidence changed. That says more about your character than the mistake ever could. The foreman walked over next, still carrying his hard hat beneath one arm. I have supervised construction projects for 22 years, he said. Today reminded me of something I should have remembered from the beginning. Permits tell us what we may build. County records tell us where we may build it. Robert smiled quietly. And when those two disagree, the county record always speaks first. Around us, the final contractor truck slowly rolled toward the ranch gate. No one complained. No one argued. No one blamed the crew. They had arrived believing they were following the law. They were leaving with a better understanding of where the law actually began. Vanessa finally looked up. The confidence that had carried her through the morning had disappeared. We relied on the documents we were given, she said softly. Robert answered before I could. So did everyone standing here. He rested one hand on the faded monument preservation certificate. The difference is that these documents were never left out. They were simply never read. No one challenged him. There was nothing left to debate. The original county boundary survey, the monument preservation certificate, the Whitmore Ranch deed, the county field verification, and the sheriff's decision all pointed to exactly the same conclusion. One by one, the county officials prepared to leave. Sheriff Brooks shook my hand before returning to his patrol vehicle. Take care of your ranch, Mr. Whitmore. I always will, I replied. Claire gathered the certified copies for the county archive, while Michael secured the field verification inside his document case. Robert carefully folded the original plats and returned them to the old aluminum survey case he had carried for decades. Before climbing into his truck, he stopped beside the nearest Orange County monument and smiled. People think these monuments exist to mark property lines, he said. I looked at him. What do they really mark? He brushed a little dust from the faded orange paint with the side of his boot. The place where assumptions end and facts begin. By late afternoon, every county vehicle had disappeared down the gravel road. The contractors were gone. The trench would be restored. The tire tracks would fade after the next hard rain. I walked alone toward the western pasture where Margaret's bluebonnets would bloom again in a few months, just as they had every spring since she first planted them. The 4 Orange County monuments still stood exactly where my father had shown them to me all those years ago. As I rested one hand on the nearest marker, I remembered something he told me during one of our long walks across the ranch when I was barely old enough to understand why those monuments mattered. Most people believe ownership is protected by fences, he said. It is not. Fences eventually fall. Ownership is protected by the truth, and the truth is patient enough to outlast pride. Looking across the quiet pasture, I finally understood exactly what he meant. The Homeowners Association did not lose because I argued better. They did not lose because I was louder. They lost because they trusted assumptions more than history, recent paperwork more than permanent records, and confidence more than verification. They brought permits. My grandfather left proof. In the end, their permits stopped at the property line. His proof did not.